and welcome to this acoustic guitar recording deep dive. This is a very special conversation that I've been looking forward to for a while, meeting here with one of my favorite guitarists and also a fantastic teacher, a fellow YouTuber, and I'm extremely honored to be able to interact with him right now and bring you this acoustic guitar recording deep dive. I'm here with Joe Robinson. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Joe. It's really great to be here.
Thanks, Jared. Really nice to chat with you, mate.
Yeah, so quick introduction about us and what this workshop is. And if you are interested in recording with an acoustic guitar, this is absolutely the place to be because Joe is very much an expert on this topic. Joe's an expert at a lot of things, and if you don't know him already, I'll put a link to his channel, listen to his music, go just read his Wikipedia page. He's an absolute virtuoso guitar player and just a wonderful guy. And a lot of interviews with Joe might talk about his guitar playing or his past or some of the superstar guitarists that he's played with, but he happens to be an expert at recording, specifically acoustic guitar. And my understanding of his story, I'll have him share some of it in a second too, but just in a nutshell, is that Joe was recording at a very high level at a young age with great recording engineers in big studios. And after a while of doing that, figuring, gosh, I wish I could get these results on my own, at my own house. You know, what do I need to do that? So years and years later, we are very privileged to have Joe with all the experience that he has, and he's going to share some deep dive information with us, and I'm going to kind of walk us through it. If you don't know me, I'm Jared Borkowski from soundguitarlessons.com, and it's just a little collaboration that we're doing. So in this workshop, we're going to talk about gear first, and we're going to go through different microphones, preamps, interface, DAW, headphones, and speakers, and I'm just going to kind of get the information out of Joe for you. This is as if maybe you really wanted to get started recording at a professional sounding level at your own house with an acoustic guitar. And if you had a chance to just chat with Joe on the phone and say, hey, how do I get started? That's kind of what we're going to go over all that stuff for you here. So really awesome opportunity. After talking about gear, we're going to go into mic techniques, which is a big one. We're going to talk about mono techniques and stereo techniques. Then we're going to talk about mixing. And lastly, we will talk about mastering. And at the end, we have a special offer for you if you do want to go deeper, but this also stands on its own and will be extremely valuable if you're interested in this topic. So thank you again, Joe. If you could start by just giving us, even if it's kind of a recap of what I just said, just a tiny bit about the history of how you got so deep into recording yourself on the acoustic guitar and how you got so good at it. What's the story behind that?
Of course, yeah. Well, like you said, I was working with some really great recording engineers from a young age. I made my first solo guitar album when I was about 15. And that was a really fascinating experience. I learned what I really sound like. Because sometimes when you press that record button and you listen back, you realize, wow, I'm not as smooth and clean as I would like. And it can be a bit of a reality check. So I had a number of experiences like that recording at a young age, and I started to get to a point where I wanted to make some solo recordings on my own, and I started looking around about how exactly to stereo mic a guitar properly, where to place the microphones, how to process the sound and create a really nice high quality beautiful tone, because when you're recording solo guitar, you really want the guitar to jump out and have a real beautiful quality. It's very different to like playing acoustic guitar in a pop song where there's drums and keyboards and things like that. So that's kind of the background behind my journey in wanting to learn how to really capture my acoustic guitar in a simple, dare I say, foolproof way on my own in my own space. And there's a lot to consider, but it's all very practical, and it's all very, very doable as well, because these days creating YouTube videos and content for social media, very much, I put all these skills to use on a daily basis in that world.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Quick idea here to just encourage people who, I mean, if you're watching this, you probably already are very interested in improving the sound or getting started with your acoustic guitar recording. But what you said at the beginning there about how it reflects back to what you really sound like. Just want to say this is a highly valuable thing for anybody to work towards and work on, even if you're not thinking, oh, I want to be releasing stuff on Spotify or something like that. Just that experience of how good do I really sound? What's really happening in my playing, and can I get it to sound at a higher? It's a extremely fun process, and I've learned a lot from Joe just very recently, and some stuff that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to apply that and get better at recording. And any amount of improving recording guitar, I would argue, is at the same time helping us just improve our guitar playing. So I just wanted to make sure that that we said that. So let's go into. And by the way, just another plug for Joe. If you want to hear the results of what he's talking about, you can just go listen to the music that he has out there. It sounds fantastic. So the proof is in the pudding. So let's talk about gear. Joe, if you could let us know what are the different types of microphones for specifically recording acoustic guitar, and why would you use each one, and whatever comes to mind. I know there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of answers to that, but in your experience.
Well, generally there's three categories of microphones that'll be a go-to choice if you were to work in a professional recording studio. There's a small diaphragm condenser microphone, a large diaphragm condenser microphone, and a ribbon microphone. Some people also use dynamic microphones, but I find that a dynamic mic, like an SM57 is a typical dynamic mic, doesn't have a lot of sensitivity. So if you're playing fingerstyle guitar like I love to, then a dynamic mic isn't the best choice for that. However, if you're strumming in a loud rock song, then you might go for that kind of a sound. But we'll talk about small diaphragm, large diaphragm condensers, as well as ribbon microphones. Small diaphragm condensers, also called pencil mics, really beautiful. They capture the acoustic guitar in a really beautiful way. They tend to have a lot of detail. If you listen to really great bluegrass recordings, then oftentimes they're using small diaphragm condensers on instruments like acoustic guitar and mandolin. And if you were to record a classical guitar solo performance, for example, typically one or two small diaphragm condensers would be a choice for that. So that's probably the most typical choice for recording solo acoustic guitar. A large diaphragm condenser is typically used for vocals in like popular music, a 1-inch diaphragm mic, and it could be a tube mic or a solid state mic. There's lots of different options here. But I also really love to record acoustic guitar with a large diaphragm condenser. You get kind of a rounder, bigger sound, and you can get some really nice proximity effect. If you're micing pretty close, you can get a lot of warmth and roundness from a large diaphragm condenser. And of course there's microphones that fall into these categories at all different price levels. If you're looking for a small diaphragm condenser, I really like the Octava. I think they call the MK12. Or the Octava cheap pencil mics are really good. And I also really like the Aston Starlight, which is a small diaphragm condenser that's quite affordable, a couple $100 or so, especially if you buy used. And large diaphragm condensers, there's some great options from Audio-Technica and brands like that. You're going to get a really nice sound with any condenser mic, really. Ribbon microphones are also a really cool sound. And if you listen to recordings from Jason Isbell, for example, his producer Dave Cobbs uses a lot of ribbon microphones on acoustic guitars, and it gives a kind of a darker, weightier sound. It's difficult to describe, but when you hear it, you'll instantly say, oh, okay, that's what a ribbon microphone does. It does give a really beautiful quality to the sound, and I often combine a ribbon microphone and a condenser microphone, and you put the capsules very close to each other, so you get kind of the best of both worlds to create one big fat mono signal. So anyway, that's a lot of information about those three categories of microphones. Depending on the kind of music, depending on the role of your acoustic guitar, whether it's a solo performance or whether it's in the context of other instruments, will depend on what you choose to use. And like I said, there are many options, some of them quite affordable. So those are the kind of go-to choices for acoustic guitar recording, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Two quick follow-up questions that maybe people are thinking. One, do you ever combine a small diaphragm condenser and a large diaphragm condenser when stereo miking, which we're going to talk about stereo miking techniques coming up, but do you use exclusively one type and the other type, or you'll use both at once?
Oh, sometimes I combine them for sure.
Yeah.
It's sometimes nice to have a small diaphragm on the kind of neck side and then a large diaphragm on the body side, so that the large diaphragm picks up the kind of warmth of the body and the small diaphragm picks up the articulation of the higher notes. So you can certainly mix and match when stereo miking. Some people like to have a match pair when stereo miking, but I don't find that's as applicable for an instrument like a guitar, because the neck side and the body side they just sound so different that if the microphones are matched, I don't feel it makes a huge difference. Whereas if you were miking a piano or some other instrument, then it might be more applicable. But yeah, it's really, really nice sometimes to mix and match like that.
That's really helpful, and also kind of helps one understand what the qualities of the different types are, because you're saying the large diaphragm condenser on the body side, it sounds like the way you're describing it, it's more sensitive to the lower frequencies in the body of so you want to put it where it kind of performs the best, and the small diaphragm condenser is more sensitive to higher frequencies, so you would put it where it's going to pick those up better. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and when I say the neck side and the body side, the mics might only be 4 inches apart, but those 4 inches sound so different, and you'll instantly be able to see it in the waveform that you'll get so much more signal from the body of the guitar than the neck. And so one mixing technique, which we can talk about later, is just boosting the neck side so that it doesn't sound like it's a lobsided stereo recording.
Yeah. And that's really cool example, just how fun it can be to experiment. I've heard you talk about, move the mic 1 inch over and try that and listen to it. Move the mic another inch over and try, and letting that be kind of a playful, experimental time, when we're recording our own music. And from what I hear, from what you've shared, you've done a lot of that kind of experimentation and hearing the different results. Are all condenser microphones required to have extra power, or is that just some of them? I know about phantom power, which is a power that needs to power some microphones. Dynamic microphones like this one I'm using here is less sensitive. That's why people use it for podcasts and stuff like that. Kind of picks up less of the room. It's less sensitive. It's very quiet, and I have to turn the volume up a lot for it to pick up the sound. I don't know this answer, but I know some condenser mics need what's called phantom power. And do all of them or just some of them?
Well, all condenser microphones need power of some kind, is my understanding. But a lot of condenser microphones have their own power supply, especially if they're tube condenser microphones, like I have some tube mics. And they'll have their own power supply, so the preamp does not need to send phantom power because the power supply has all that taken care of. And
gotcha.
If you were to use a pencil condenser, like a small diaphragm condenser, typically you need phantom power to run those mics.
That's a great answer. Yeah, I've seen mics in studios that are connected to a big box that then goes into the wall, so it's getting its own power. And we're going to talk about interfaces in a second, which if you don't know about those, that's the thing that will power your microphone if it does need power, and the power would just come through the microphone cable. Let's move on to preamp advice. What is a preamp? What are they? Why do we need them? And a big question, if even for a lot of us who know what they are, why would we need a preamp that's different than the preamps that are built into, say, a consumer level interface, which again, we're going to talk about interfaces in a second. But anything you can say about preamps, I think it's kind of mysterious what's going on with them.
Well, if you go into a professional recording studio, they will usually be either using the preamps in a mixing console, like an SSL or a Neve or an API mixing console, or they'll use outboard microphone preamps. If you were to go to a home studio, oftentimes the microphone preamps are built into consumer level recording interfaces. And that's not to say that those preamps are inferior. However, there is something really beautiful and high quality, and a really high quality preamp is a great way to really get the most out of your microphones. I've heard quite a few people say that the preamp is more important than the microphone itself. So if you had a choice of using a cheaper microphone with an excellent preamp, that would create a better result than using a really expensive microphone with a very cheap preamp. So the preamp basically takes the microphone signal, boosts it up, and there's different circuitry in different types of microphone preamps, different op amps and transformers and things that impart a color and a tone to the sound. So you'll hear an API preamp versus a Neve preamp. The kind of typical choices that are good to understand, even because there's lots of different companies that make copies of these kind of classic preamps, and maybe you prefer more of this sound versus that sound. Just to give you an example of the way I recorded an album of mine called Christmas au Chalet, which is a solo guitar Christmas album. I was recording in a cabin in Quebec that belongs to my wife's family, and there's no power in the cabin, so I brought a little generator, battery-powered generator, and I had a 2-channel mic preamp that it's made by Bryston, and I had 2 DPA microphones, and I just recorded those flat with no compression, no EQ or anything, and I did a very simple mix, sent it to the mastering engineer who I like to work with, and I get so many compliments on the sound of that album. But it's very simple. It was 2 pencil condensers and a really beautiful 2-channel preamp, and that was the sound. If I was to bypass the preamp and just plug right into an interface, like a Universal Audio Apollo is a very common interface that people use, you could still get a really, really nice sound. And there are many popular artists who use an interface at that level. So you can certainly have hit songs and create really successful recordings using an interface like that. But for my taste, my favorite solo guitar recordings were recorded with nice mics and a beautiful preamp, and it really does add a lot to the weight of the sound and the quality and the punch, and it's one of those things where if you have a piece of like an interface like a Universal Audio Apollo, they already have good preamps in it. So if you were to upgrade to a kind of mid-range preamp, you're probably not going to notice much difference. But if you upgrade to a really nice, high-quality 2-channel preamp, then you could use that for your acoustic solo tracks and get a pretty amazing sound. So
that's really
I hope
helpful.
that makes sense.
Yeah. That's really helpful. A little kind of hidden tip in there is to keep things simple. Your story about how you did the Christmas album, and I think a lot of us, when we get into recording, we overcomplicate things or overdo everything. So it's cool to hear how that album came together. No, that's really helpful. So just to kind of summarize my understanding of it here is that interfaces, which is the thing you plug the microphone into that brings the signal into your computer, it has a preamp in it. It's just not necessarily one of the high quality, amazing preamps that professional studios are using, and that people who can hear the difference, like Joe, are using. And to use a better quality preamp, it makes sense to think of it as the way you described it, as it's going through higher quality circuitry, basically, and that is affecting the sound. And so you would plug into this higher quality circuitry and then bring it into the interface, which is just going through another preamp, which you probably just is not going to affect the sound that much. The higher quality sound is going into it, and then into the computer. So yeah, that can be kind of confusing if even me, who I've known about what preamps are forever, but still kind of confused about them at the same time. So thank you for your explanation of that. Let's define what the interface is. We don't need to spend much time on this, but I've mentioned it a few times. So for anyone who doesn't know, let's make sure we clarify what the interface is and its importance.
There's a few different components to an interface. There's analog to digital conversion, which is when you take your analog signal from the microphone and it converts it to a digital signal, which you can then see in your digital audio workstation in your computer. And then there's digital to audio conversion, which is the playback. And so higher quality interfaces have higher quality A to D and D to A conversion. So that's one consideration. The other consideration is just the workflow. Different interfaces have a different interface.
Yeah.
So on the computer, for example, universal audio interfaces have a console where you can actually record into plugins if you want, and Apogee interfaces have their own little Apogee control where you can control this. And I'm using a Pro Tools HD interface now, and so that kind of interface is within Pro Tools. So there's lots of different options. A lot of people out there, probably the most popular, cheaper option is the Focusrite Scarlett interfaces, which sound really good. And I mean,
using it right now. I don't know if I could. Yeah. It's like one of the cheapest, easiest to get. Yeah, so I have the little 2-channel Focusrite. That's what I'm using. That's what you're hearing my audio through right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can get really great sounds with an interface like that. You don't need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on an interface. It's kind of like the law of diminishing returns. If you get a reliable piece of gear, like I would say the Focusrite is a reliable option that's trusted by millions of people. And then if you were to buy a $2,000 interface, the difference would not be worth that price difference to most people. So it's kind of like as you spend more, you get less. But if you're like me and you're really trying to get the highest quality sound, then that might be of value to you. But yeah, generally a simple interface is totally adequate to create really excellent recordings.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a fun journey to, at least for me, feel like I understand the limitations of something before going up to the next level. You know, like do I actually feel like I'm ready or understand what I would be getting that's better, or am I going to hear the difference, you know, rather than starting with something high quality, which coincides nicely with most people's budgets too. Like you're not going to spring for the highest when you're just getting started on something. So I think I've heard you say some similar advice before too, you know, like can hearing what the lower quality stuff sounds like will help you understand what you're getting later.
I mean, it's really easy. I used to do this all the time. I used to just sit there with catalogs of music gear and think, oh, if I only had a U87 for $3,000, then I could create a great recording. But if I was to call up one of my really great recording engineer friends, they'd probably say, I'd probably go for a cheaper Audio-Technica mic, and then I'd use a really nice preamp and spend $1,200 on the not great preamp. And then you can just record with your cheaper interface. The A to D converters are fine on that. It's kind of like just understanding the different components helps you make better choices. And if you asked the advice of a salesman, you're going to get sold a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
But it's one of those things where as you experience and as you learn more about the components and what other people are using and where it's important to have kind of put the dollars where the quality can be heard. It gets a little nuanced. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I started with really cheap interfaces and quickly learned how to maximize them. I recorded this song when I was a teenager called Guitar Symphony, where I just layered hundreds of guitar tracks, and I would just play one note at a time and create this kind of crazy beat sound. And yeah, I mean, it's really fun to explore recording, and I highly encourage anybody out there to learn how to do it. I think it's an essential skill these days as a musician of any level, whether you're an artist recording your own music, or whether you're accompanying other people, or whether you're teaching, or whether you're whatever you're doing, it's really valuable to know the basics of recording.
Absolutely. It's like literacy in a way. It's like communication, right? If you couldn't read or write, it would be really hard to get around, even if you could speak well. So it's kind of like this way of getting down into or sharing, what you're doing. And every teacher will tell all their students recording yourself is good just for the practice of hearing it back. But a lot of us too want to eventually be sharing with a loved one at the very least, right? Like someone, oh, you're playing guitar. Can I hear you play? Oh, I can send you this little thing I've been recording. So I think it adds a lot to the fulfillment of the journey of working on the instrument in general. So that's very helpful with the interface. And just want to say this is why it's so special to talk to someone as experienced as you. I love hearing from experts, true experts who walk down this need for what those of us who are less experienced feel like are necessary, very expensive things. And I like your story about the professional recording engineer friend who might say, oh yeah, maybe I'd use a cheaper this other mic, which is way cheaper, right? So when we're less experienced, we just think the more expensive the better. But when someone has a lot of experience, they really know, oh, I'd go for that. I mean, there's some obviously in studios, not for solo guitar, but like SM57 or something that like people go for all the time, and it's like a $100 mic, depending on the sound they want and stuff like that. So let's go into quickly just saying what a DAW is. So the interface is the thing that you plug into that brings the signal into the computer, and then you can record into something that is needed, which is the software itself. If you want to talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So the DAW is a digital audio workstation. And common examples would be Logic, Pro Tools, Ableton. There are many Cubase. There are many choices, and they all have different pricing structures. They all have pros and cons. I use Pro Tools. I would say Logic is probably my most recommended choice for anyone who's using a Mac.
That's what I use. Yeah.
Yeah. Logic is, I think it costs $299 or $199 or something like that. Yeah. And it's a one-time payment, and it's really got so many features and great virtual instruments, and it's an excellent recording platform. I use Pro Tools, and I think Pro Tools is the best for mixing. And the reason I started using Pro Tools is because all the studios in Nashville use Pro Tools. So if I was to have a tracking session at a big studio with a live group, I could bring it home and still have all the session data. But it's kind of a complicated pricing arrangement they have with the different levels, and it's a monthly or a yearly or a blah blah. Anyway, Cubase is a really great option as well. I think it's probably the most powerful and fully featured of all of the digital audio workstations, but it's you probably won't find as many tutorials for a program like Cubase, whereas there's so many great tutorials for Logic, and if you're mixing, there's so many great tutorials for Pro Tools. And of course, there are free options. I'm not super familiar with all the different free options, but basically they all do the same thing. Yeah. You set the sample rate, you set the you set up your session, and you record your audio into it, and it's just all zeros and ones. So Logic sounds the same as Pro Tools, sounds the same as Cubase. Right. There are different ways to route sounds and all that. But as in terms of the recording itself, if you just wanted to record really great sounding solo recordings, then all you really need is a 2-channel interface of some kind, and it can be. I don't know if Audacity is the free one, but there's free options that
Audacity
will do a fine job.
Audacity, Reaper, I've heard people talk about, and GarageBand. I've heard really impressive sounding recordings with GarageBand, which is only Mac, but it comes free with Mac, or I believe, or it used to. But yeah, like you said, it's all the same. You're just recording into something. So if you recorded well with the techniques we're talking about here, and you could record into GarageBand and get a great sound and just have it be a simple process. I do use Logic, and if you're wanting to pay for something and not, Pro Tools can charge weird prices and a lot because they're very much the industry standard. Like all the studios are using them, so I hear you on that. But Logic is good. GarageBand is basically like a simple entry level free version of Logic, I would say. So Yeah. So that's just the software to record into, and then you can do post processing and stuff, which we're going to talk about in a second. Is there anything people need to know about headphones and speakers? And we're kind of going over all the gear here. So just to say, what's the need on those?
Well, there is a few different types of headphones. There's closed back, open back, and inner ear monitors. There might be other types too, but I think open back headphones are preferable for mixing. Closed back headphones are typically used for tracking because the sound doesn't leak out of them. And I use in-ear monitors for recording acoustic guitar because you get very, very little bleed from a click track. So if you were going to record a solo acoustic song that's very delicate and soft, and you wanted to have a click track going, which you don't always need to record with a click track, but it's nice to have that option. And a click track is just a metronome, so that your song is the same tempo start to finish. And if you do 5 passes of a song, you can cut the verse from one and the chorus from another take, and it all just fits together, and it's all the same tempo. So there's a very strong case to be made that recording with a click is advantageous. If you use inner ear monitors like this, then you get much less click bleed than if you have closed back headphones on. So that's one of the reasons I use in-ear monitors. And if you wanted a cheaper way to do that, you could use like earbuds, like iPod earbuds, or like $10 earbuds from Amazon or whatever. Yeah. And you could use construction earmuffs over the top of those.
Yeah.
So that's a way to make sure that you don't get click bleed, which is a real issue with delicate songs.
Yeah.
Especially if the microphones are really close to the guitar and you like to play with your head kind of down in that area.
If you're not recording with a click, you don't need to wear anything then, right? Like if you don't record with a click, you don't, or do you wear headphones to hear the monitoring coming through?
Yeah, sometimes it's nice to hear what the microphones are doing.
Okay.
Because if you happen to move a few inches and all of a sudden the microphone is kind of pointing at the sound hole and you're getting this horrible booming resonance, then it's nice to be aware of that. If I was to go to a session in Nashville and do an acoustic guitar overdub thing, the engineer would usually just set the mic like roughly where they would think it would be, and I'll sit down and they'll say, yeah, just move around until it sounds good in your headphones.
Yeah, okay.
And so I'll move a little and shuffle the mic around, and maybe they'll take a note of where it is. And the headphones can be a way to just kind of make sure everything is sounding in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And speakers are great for mixing. You can mix through headphones. The speakers I use for a long time that are really quite affordable are the KRK Rocket 5s. Mm-hmm. They're a cheap powered speaker that one of my engineering mentors is Jakir King, who's mixed a lot of great albums for people and recorded amazing albums. He's won a bunch of Grammys, and he's mixed a lot on the little KRKs and says that they translate quite well, and in order to get them to sound really good, you'd have to kind of make sure that your recording is well mixed. So that's one of the things you want from a speaker. If a speaker sounds too good, then sometimes you can create a mix on a really great speaker with so much detail that you take it to your car and you're like, oh man, it sounds like trash in my car.
Yep.
So, that's one of the qualities you look for in studio monitors is that they translate well. And of course, when we talk about monitoring, we start to talk about acoustic treatment, which is a whole other conversation. But if your room is reasonably well treated and you have a good small set of speakers, then that's the ideal situation for mixing. However, like I said, you can totally mix with a good pair of open back headphones. I have a pair of open back headphones somewhere that cost $79 or something. Yeah. They're Philips headphones, I think, and they sound great, and they really do a good job. However, you couldn't record with them because the sound leaks out the sides. Yeah, and there's kind of pros and cons to all those different types of.
Right. Yeah. And we'll talk about mixing. We'll talk about mixing in a second. Selfish question here. That's kind of more about the performance of recording. In my experience, recording with a click makes editing so much easier, but it almost always feels like it changes the performance in a way that doesn't feel as human to me. And I'm wondering what you think about that. Is it just for you enough experience doing it with the click that you can get it to you're playing to sound as expressive as you want it to, or do you still kind of feel like there's a difference? Does it hold you back in any kind of way?
Oh, it's a major challenge playing with a click and getting it to feel good.
Yeah.
I would say that I play drums a little bit, and I love to read interviews with great drummers, and oftentimes a drummer will have, that they won't feel self-conscious at all going in to play a live gig because they just go out there and play songs they've already played a bunch of times, and they know how to do that. But when they go in the studio, it's like you're under a microscope and the engineer's looking at the grid of the session, and if your kick and snare aren't falling in exactly the right place, then as a drummer you can start to feel self-conscious about that. And it's the same with being a guitar player, especially if it's a solo track, and getting it to feel good while still being really locked to the metronome is such a challenge. And the best drummers can do it so well. And there's a few things you can do. You can have a quarter note click or an eighth note click if it's a song that's in 4/4 time. An eighth note click has more subdivisions, so there's less there's less room for error within those beats. I would say a quarter note click. People say that in Nashville they do an eighth note click, and in LA they do a quarter note click. So with a quarter note click, you have a little more time, a little more room for groove and nuance,
looseness.
But I would say it's really great to practice playing with a click and working on getting it to feel good. If you're wanting to create the most real and authentic and inspired performance, then recording without a click will probably get you that result. But there are definitely advantages to using a click and playing with a click. You can also create a little like a shaker loop. Like I've been using this plugin called Skaka lately, Skaka, which is made by this Swedish company. I think it costs $39 or something, but it's just it's all these different shakers and tambourines and things. And you can change the tempo dramatically and the shaker still sounds good. It's not like a sample where you slow it down and it starts to lose the fidelity. So that can be a way to play with something that feels less like...
Gotcha. Yeah. I guess it obviously very much depends on the piece of music too. If it's a piece of music that is meant to groove and stay in time, then it's a matter of get practice with the metronome, the shaker, the backing track, get it to feel good. But especially with solo guitar, I'm guessing depending on the piece, if you're playing a ballad that you might want to actually have some flexibility with, you would like, because I have a background in classical guitar. Obviously, they would never use the click. It's because you want the expressiveness of changing the time. So that obviously just in case anyone's wondering, like it totally obviously depends on the piece of music and the end result that you would want.
100%, and for ballads, it would be weird in most cases to use a click, and certainly for classical music.
Okay, the thing that most people want to know when talking about recording and asking about recording is the actual miking technique. So we went over all this stuff that's important outside of that, so we can get this deep dive, which is the goal of this here. We don't need to be all encompassing here, but can we talk about some simple advice on mono recording techniques and stereo recording techniques, just kind of an overview. So I'm hoping anyone who watches this, listens to this, can take the information, get some affordable gear, or use what they have, and kind of level up what they're doing right away.
I would say if you're recording solo acoustic guitar, then it's really nice to have a way to mic it in stereo, because you're going to get a whole nother level of detail and sense of space. There's so much more you can do and experiment with and learn. There are some great stereo miking techniques. Probably the most simple go-to configuration is XY. It's the most difficult to mess up. Basically, you just put the microphones in this kind of X position.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you position that in the right spot, in the right distance from the guitar, you get a really beautiful sound.
Which is where
I would say that, generally between the 12th and 14th fret is my go-to position. And if you're between, I would say 5 to 10 inches away from the guitar, then that's a good place to experiment with. Depends on how soft you play. Depends on how much of the room ambience you want. If you move the mics back, you get more of the room ambience. And sometimes you get kind of a more realistic guitar sound, but if it's closer, it kind of sounds like the guitar's right there, and there's an intimacy to that's nice.
Yeah, I like that.
But it's amazing. Between the 12th and 14th fret, the 12th fret is going to sound kind of clearer and more present, and the 14th fret is going to sound warmer and more.
Crazy.
You get kind of a little more boominess, and it's such an interesting
Just 2 frets.
thing to play with and experiment with. But if I was to think of just a go-to position, it's about 6 inches away from the 12th to 14th fret.
Gotcha. And that's 2 mics.
And if you're recording with other stereo instruments, like if there's stereo piano or keyboards or drums with stereo overheads in the track, then I always record in mono in that situation, because if you have like stereo acoustic guitar, stereo piano, stereo drums, it just starts to sound like just a big mess. So mono is definitely my preferred choice if I'm recording acoustic guitar within a track with other instruments.
Yeah, and mono would just be one of these mics we talked about. What you like the sound of? Same positioning, but just one mic, or just not the two. Yeah, not the two. If you wanted to, depending on your music, a lot of home recording songwriters will not as much solo guitar, but if you're doing songwriting stuff, a lot of players will record mono and then record over it the same part, so you can get that depth of sound and move it through the stereo field, like recording one take of the same thing, shifting it over to the left speaker, recording the same take of the same thing over it. But that's a certain sound too. It's kind of more of a pop music kind of produced sound. It's kind of nice to experiment with. That's real. I love that advice of just using the XY thing, and we'll throw a little image on the screen of what that XY looks like with the small diaphragm condensers, like we talked about earlier. Why would a beginner at this? Why would we want to use that first? Just a quick answer on what the problems are with spacing those microphones apart. Why is that less advisable until we're kind of more experienced?
Well, you start to get phase problems.
Which is?
If the microphones are different distance from the source, like another one of my favorite positions that I really love the sound of is the shoulder on the 12th fret. And if for example, the 12th fret mic is 6 inches away, and then the shoulder mic is 24 inches away, you're going to get some phase problems. So it's challenging to get those microphones the same distance from the source, considering the guitar is like this kind of big big thing, and you're micing these precise points.
I've experienced that before.
Phase can be a challenge. And as you start to do like a spaced pair of microphones, you can have phasing challenges too. The beauty of an XY miking position is you're using cardioid mics, and so they have a pickup pattern that cancels out the sides. They cancels out the back, and so that kind of XY results in a minimal phase problem. So that's really the reason that the XY is a simple go-to. And it's if you set up a space pair in a way that is working for you. The other thing is if you just move the slightest amount, it kind of throws it off a lot. So it can be a little finicky.
Just wanted to make sure we included that, so if someone's not, I have 2 mics, I'm just going to kind of put them wherever. It can make the sound really. The phase problem is the audio waves being out of sync with each other, into which makes them cancel each other out to some degree. So I feel like I'm pretty good at figuring things out, and I can't figure out, phase issues. Like it's really bizarre when it becomes a problem, and what sounded at first like this big stereo sound, oh, this is amazing in my headphones, it sounds like this thin, terrible thing if you play it through a phone or play it in mono or play it, anywhere else. So, yeah. Just my experience. Like I have not, I'm like, I got to stick with XY is where I'm at, Yeah.
Yeah. The downside of XY is it's kind of it's a smaller sound.
Yeah.
It's a smaller stereo image.
Yeah.
If you were to do a space pair or the shoulder 12th fret or OTRF or DIN or any of those other different techniques, you get a wider stereo image, which can be really nice, but it's difficult to pull it off without any problems. And if you're like me and you're recording yourself playing, then generally you want to kind of make it as simple as possible, and you don't want to be thinking about too many technical things, because you want to be thinking about
playing.
You're playing and
And to kind of call back with the Christmas album, I believe you said you did XY for that.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So this album that you get complimented on the sound of, keep it simple, XY. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I got like the New York Times reviewed that, and they picked it as one of the best Christmas albums of the year. And
amazing.
I got a lot of things from that. And part of the other consideration was I was recording in a cabin with no acoustic treatment.
Yeah.
And it was not a bad sounding space, but I didn't want too much of the room ambience to kind of get in the sound. So the XY pretty close to the guitar just seemed like a good choice. And
That's great. No, I love the real world examples that you can share with us, and people can go listen to them, go listen to that album. Bonus tip here that wasn't on our list, but we mentioned Acoustic Treatment. You can see one behind me. This is an acoustic panel that makes the room that I'm in sound less echoey. And we see one behind you as well. And if you watch some of Joe's videos, you'll see, I think that's one behind you. But Acoustic Treatment, it can be...
Yeah, there's a few.
It can be super simple. But these are just panels that Joe made his, I made mine. You can also buy them. It has like a type of foam inside that absorbs the sound. Most rooms in a house are going to not be a great sound automatically, so it deadens the sound a little bit. But Joe, I've heard you talk. You recorded that album in a cabin that didn't have treatment. What I've never been able to do is get a good sounding room on my own. Right? That's why I feel like why people go to studios a lot of times, right? To get the better room, even if they have all the gear at home, like get the better room sound.
Yeah, it's challenging recording acoustic guitar in some ways. In some ways, it's easier than other instruments because it's not a very loud instrument.
Yeah.
If you record drums in a 8x8 bedroom, it's gonna sound like garbage.
Yeah.
Because it's so loud and it's just bouncer everywhere. If you record acoustic guitar in that room, you can kind of get away with it. But as soon as you try to mix or listen back with speakers to anything with some volume or some bigger waveforms, it just becomes like this. It becomes a mess. And there's a few different types of acoustic treatment. There's absorption and diffusion. Absorption, if you use like the Ed Crate foam type stuff, that only diffuses the higher frequencies.
Right.
And what can happen is if you put that all over the room, then you get this big buildup in the low mids, which is kind of this ugly area where it just becomes this muddy sound. So I actually don't like that kind of treatment.
Right.
These panels are built with like a fiberglass, or you can use recycled cotton. There's a few different methods. I have some panels that I built myself. These ones in my new studio actually are made by Prime Acoustic, which make commercially available options that are really good, and they absorb more of the lower frequencies, including those kind of ugly low mids. So it gets a more balanced, controlled sound. But yeah, acoustic treatment is, everyone used to tell me, don't spend your money on really great speakers, spend your money on acoustic treatment. And I used to be like, oh yeah, they're full of crap. But there is actually a lot of truth to that.
Because if you have the best
treated space,
if you have the best speakers in the world, and then they're bouncing around your room and making it sound bad, who cares how good the speakers are? Yeah, that's really helpful. And as far as just recording goes, then we're going to talk about mixing in a second. that's helpful to know. Like the treatment doesn't matter as much if you, especially if you're micing close to the guitar. I'm just repeating things that I've heard Joe say, but mic it close to the guitar, and really you get to kind of figure out, do I like this sound or not? Because like, what's if you're hearing it in the headphones, and then when you're mixing, if you're going to turn the volume up, that's when it matters more. Maybe if your room is treated, if you're playing through speakers, so when you're trying to get the sound to sound the best in mixing, yeah.
Another challenge with acoustic recording is background noise.
Yeah.
Like in a house, like a refrigerator.
Yeah.
Makes a hum.
Yeah.
And you might have street noise and wind if it's windy or rainy. Like there's all those things that can come into play as well. And if you can kind of record whenever you want, then maybe you can. Like I used to turn my fridge off.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I used to unplug it, and I'd record when the traffic. At night when there's no traffic and on a clear. But
I did the same thing. And how many times did you forget to turn it back on? Because I definitely forgot.
A few times.
Yeah,
a few times.
Yeah. And then you pay the price. You gotta replenish the refrigerator.
Right.
Let's talk about mixing. Assuming someone maybe doesn't know at all what mixing is, and a lot of us understand mixing as, I got to balance all the things in the band, right? I got to get it sounding good between all the instruments.
Yeah.
But what does mixing mean if it's just your guitar, right? With a mono microphone or with this XY thing, and that's all you have. What are we doing when we mix?
Well, I like to keep it really simple. So we can talk about mixing and mastering as kind of a
perfect.
Yes. There's some overlap there. So we'll start with mastering. Like the goal is to get it so that you can put it on Spotify, you can put it on YouTube, you can put it on a CD, and it's going to sound good next to other songs.
Yeah.
Spotify have a recommendation for the loudness level, and you can download a plugin like Ulean Loudness Meter, which tells you the LUFS of the music you're playing back. And if you have just a raw recorded pair of tracks or one track, then the LUF might be minus 26, for example. And Spotify recommends minus 14. Other platforms recommend minus 12. And so that is kind of the volume level that you're recommended to hit to upload to these platforms. So how do we get the sound from minus 26 to minus 14? Well, that's going to involve like a mastering type process. So what mastering does is bumps up the level, and they use compression and limiting, and there's some EQ involved too, and there can be mid-side techniques and all kinds of different things to get the sound up to that level. But with mixing, generally mixing is balancing the different tracks, and maybe there's some automation. So maybe you want to turn up some of the quieter notes. Maybe there's a little run that you did that just didn't quite come through loud enough, so you want to bounce that up a little bit. So it's those kind of balancing elements. If you just have a pair of stereo mics, you probably have a reverb as well, and choosing the level amount of reverb would be important. And one thing I love to do is high and low pass my reverb, so that you're only getting like a reverb in the kind of warmer mid-range areas rather than like this bright splashy kind of sound. So for a real simple mixing process for my acoustic guitar, I might put a real gentle opto style compressor on, and have a reverb on an aux send that has a high pass and low pass filter on it. So I'm just getting like some reverb ambience, which these days music has so much reverb on it.
Yes.
If you listen to pop music, so it's kind of like a sound that people are used to these days. So that would be really all that goes into mixing, is maybe a tiny bit of very gentle compression, maybe a little bit of EQ, especially just filtering out the low frequencies, like below 40 cycles. Maybe you have a little bit of a cleanup area. Maybe you want to boost the highs a little bit. I generally do a little bit of a smiley face EQ with like a Pultec plugin, something like that, where you put a shelf at 16K and just do a little boost, and then maybe a little boost around 100 hertz or something like that to just give a little low and high boost. But you want to make sure those low frequencies under 30, 40, 50 cycles are filtered out. And that would be basically my mix process. There are other things you can do, like you can add tape saturation plugins and a million different types of processing, but just
keep it simple.
That's the guts of it. And then mastering is just bringing it up to that LUFS level, and perhaps doing some more surgical EQ of. There's a little bit of build up around 300 hertz. I'll duck that a little, or 180, duck that a little. Maybe boost the highs a little more, just to kind of fine tune the curve of the recording. And there are mastering engineers that you can hire through a service like Sound Better that might charge you $100 or $200, $300 a song.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't take that much time to master a song. If you hire someone to mix a song, then that takes a lot more time, so it's more expensive. But sometimes it can be really worth being pretty conservative in your mixing and just doing a very basic job of balancing things and getting it sound like the way you want it. Sending it to a mastering engineer who's a professional that can do all the other stuff and make it really sound like it needs to sound.
Yeah, a lot of people will record themselves, mix themselves, and then send to a mastering engineer. But just to kind of reiterate the simplicity here, I knew a amazing mixing and mastering engineer, and one time I was picking his brain about how he does it, and his answer, he insisted, he was like, all I do is just mess with it till it sounds better. And so that's one of those examples of someone who's such an expert. They're kind of oversimplifying what they're doing, but they know what they're doing. But just saying, I just make it sound better, which means there's no really rules if you like the sound of it. And I'm saying that because experimenting with it, whether you want to do it at a high level or not, is really valuable just for understanding music and the process and everything like that. It's really fun. It's fun to play with. So that's
and if you're just
go ahead.
If you're uploading songs to Instagram or something, I don't think you need a mastering engineer to master your Instagram performance. But if you are recording and mixing a little bit for TikTok or Instagram or anything like that, then it is helpful to understand these LUFS levels and kind of aim to get a punchy sound. You don't want to over compress and have it sound just horrible. That's easy to do. So I would, just err on the side of caution. There are some AI mastering tools that honestly sound really pretty good. Yeah. There's Lander.
Just upload it.
But if you're distributing to Spotify and other platforms like that as the kind of like your life's work, then it's probably worth having, worth considering hiring someone who does that every day and is really, great at it.
And, if you're overwhelmed right now with all of that, just know any of these plugins that we're talking about, just EQ, changing the frequency of things, some reverb, a little tiny bit of compression. That's all inside any DAW, any digital audio workstation. You just kind of grab those little plugins and then kind of play with them and mess with that. Well, I wish we could go for hours more because you know so much about all this stuff and your results are absolutely incredible. Your recordings sound phenomenal that you're doing on your own. Your videos sound incredible, not to mention, of course, just your guitar playing. So this is really generous of you to spend all this time with us. Thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out during this conversation. There's links in the description to gear that we mentioned if you want to check any of that out. And let's finish this off by just listening to Joe play so we can hear a taste of that high quality acoustic guitar recording sound that we've been talking about. Hope to see you in another lesson soon. Take care. Mm-hmm.